You've been told your whole life that being good is enough, that if you're kind, honest, patient, things will work out, people will see you, life will reward you. But let's stop pretending. You've been kind. You've played fair. You've swallowed anger you should have screamed, offered help when you were the one bleeding, apologized just to hold something fragile together. And what came of it? Nothing. No applause, no protection, just the sinking feeling that somehow being good has made you easier to ignore. You smile in meetings and get interrupted. You show up early and get passed over. You love fully and get taken for granted. And still, you cling to the idea that your virtue has value, that eventually someone will recognize it. But what if they don't? What if the world doesn't reward good intentions, only bold impressions? Machiavelli saw it clearly. It is not enough to have a good mind. The main thing is to use it well. He knew the difference between virtue and victory. He knew that morality, without the means to defend itself, becomes a weapon in someone else's hands. You think you're being respected for your goodness, but watch closely. What you're actually getting is compliance from people who know you won't bite, and they call it kindness. But it's not. It's your inability to threaten, your unwillingness to disrupt. You aren't playing the game. You're being played for refusing to. And here's the truth. You weren't overlooked because they didn't see you. You were overlooked because they saw you and knew you wouldn't fight back. You thought being a good person meant something, that if you were kind enough, careful enough, selfless enough, the world would eventually bend in your favor. But what you've actually learned, slowly, painfully, is that goodness without direction is like an open wound. It invites attention, but not care. It makes you visible, but not valued. You keep telling yourself, I did the right thing, as if that alone should grant you safety. But the world isn't structured like a moral fable. It's structured like a contest of perception, timing, and leverage. And while you were busy trying not to hurt anyone, someone else was calculating how to use you. You see, doing the right thing in a world that rewards strategy is admirable, but only if you survive it. Marcus Aurelius said, "Waste no more time arguing what a good man should be one." But even that stoic clarity doesn't mention the cost. No one warns you that being good in the wrong way can make you an accomplice in your own erasure. Machiavelli didn't oppose virtue, he opposed naive virtue. He understood that purity without precision doesn't make you noble, it makes you predictable. And in power dynamics, predictability is a map to your weaknesses. You believed your goodness was armor, but the truth is, it's only armor if you know when to take it off. You weren't hurt because you were too soft, you were hurt because you believed softness was enough. You believed softness was enough because they told you it was. Since you were a child, they fed you stories about how the good are rewarded, how honesty is a virtue, how kindness always comes back around. You watched cartoons where the brave and gentle win in the end. You read books where truth had a magical weight, and cruelty always lost to purity. And slowly, without even noticing, those stories became your compass. You told the truth when it cost you. You gave people the benefit of the doubt when they didn't earn it. You stayed quiet when you should have spoken, because you thought taking the high road meant something. But the high road, in the real world, often leads straight to a cliff. The brutal part is that you did everything they said would make you strong, and instead, it made you soft in all the wrong places. Montaigne once wrote, "Virtue refuses facility." But what no one explained is that the world does not. The world loves facility. It loves shortcuts. It admires what works, not what's right. And in that disconnect, a kind of slow disillusionment begins, where you start to wonder if maybe you weren't taught how the world works at all, just how to behave inside someone else's fantasy of it. And that's the fracture no one wants to name. The virtues we were raised on are beautiful, but they only work in a world that doesn't exist. You weren't respected because you were honest. You were tolerated because you were useful. You were tolerated because you were useful, and that's the part no one warned you about. The part where your goodness stops being admirable and starts being expected. You hold the door. You remember their birthday. You cover their shift. You clean up the mess they won't even acknowledge. And at first they thank you. At first it feels noticed, but then the thanks go quiet. The asks get heavier. The assumptions grow. Soon, your kindness isn't a gift, it's a given. And you're not allowed to stop because stopping would feel like failing, like betrayal. So you keep going, you keep saying yes, you keep showing up, and somewhere along the way you start to notice how rarely they show up for you. How you get called when something needs fixing, but not when something's being celebrated. How your voice softens the room, but never shifts it. And when you finally get tired, truly tired, and ask for something back, they look at you like you've changed, like you're being difficult, like the problem is new. But it's not new. It's just no longer hidden. Kierkegaard once wrote, "The most painful state of being is remembering the future, particularly the one you'll never have." That's what it feels like, to keep doing the right thing in a world that never mirrors it back. You weren't forgotten because you were quiet. You were forgotten because your value was measured by how little space you took up. You were forgotten because your value was measured by how little space you took up. And maybe that's where the story starts to split, between the world you were promised and the one you actually live in. The turning point comes quietly, not in rage, but in recognition that the game is rigged, not for evil, but for leverage. That the ones who rise are not always the most skilled, but the most strategic. And here, stepping out from the margins of your education, your morality, your gentle illusions, comes Machiavelli. Not grinning, not cruel, but precise. He doesn't tell you to betray your values. He tells you to protect them with eyes open. He writes, "Any man who tries to be good all the time is bound to come to ruin among the great number who are not good, not because goodness is wrong, but because goodness without strategy is a target painted on your back." And now you start to see it, the shadow games, the calibrated silences, the way the powerful don't declare, they imply, the way they don't react, they measure. You once thought staying visible was noble, but sometimes the ones who survive are the ones who move in partial light, neither exposed nor concealed, just unreadable enough to stay alive. Power, you realize, doesn't live in declarations. It lives in the ability to withhold, in knowing when to step back into the dark. You weren't left behind because you lacked virtue. You were left behind because you believed virtue alone was protection. You believed virtue was protection, but protection from what exactly? From being hurt? From being used? From being dismissed? The truth is, morality without force doesn't protect you. It exposes you. You walk into a room holding your values like an offering, hoping they'll speak louder than your voice ever could. But they don't. Because values without weight are decoration. They soothe the conscience of the one who holds them, but do little to shift the will of those who don't. You've probably felt it already, that moment when you take the high road and no one follows. That sinking awareness that people don't listen to your goodness. They assess your position. They measure how much they can get away with. Machiavelli didn't mock morality. He measured its limits. "If one is too generous," he wrote, "he will soon squander all his wealth and become despised." And perhaps more strikingly, a man who is compassionate when he should be cruel will often suffer the ruin of both himself and others. This isn't a celebration of brutality. It's a warning about passivity. Because in the eyes of the world, unguarded kindness reads not as strength, but as submission. And submission doesn't inspire admiration. It invites exploitation. You thought you were earning respect by being decent, but you weren't. You were simply making it easier for others to avoid fearing you. You weren't ignored because they didn't know who you were. You were ignored because they knew you wouldn't make them pay for it. They knew you wouldn't make them pay for it, and that's why they kept coming back. Not out of need, not out of connection, but out of convenience. You became predictable, not because you were weak, but because you were principled in a world that rewards performance over principle. You've probably seen it. The ones who talk about loyalty while plotting behind closed doors. The ones who preach empathy for applause, not for action. The ones who cry with you but never stay. This isn't cynicism, it's recognition. We were raised to spot villains by the sharpness of their teeth, but the real predators smile. They compliment. They mirror your values until you drop your guard. Then they take what they need and disappear, confident you won't call them out because it would make things uncomfortable. Pascal once wrote, "We are not only what we do, but also what we tolerate, and you, like many, have tolerated too much in the name of peace. But look closer. The people rising aren't always the most skilled. They're the most flexible with truth. They know when to perform humility and when to weaponize it. They understand that in a world obsessed with optics, authenticity is optional. Meanwhile, you, honest, sincere, careful, you've been playing a game whose rules were never written for your survival. You weren't hurt because you lacked charm. You were hurt because you assumed sincerity was a language everyone wanted to hear. You assumed sincerity was a language everyone wanted to hear, but it wasn't, and it never was. The real mistake wasn't your kindness, it was your reflection. You looked at others and saw yourself. You assumed they meant well because you meant well. You assumed they valued honesty because you did, that they carried weight in their words the way you carried weight in yours. You handed over your trust like it was a shared currency, not realizing that in the wrong hands, trust becomes leverage. It becomes a blueprint of how to move through you without resistance. Think of Neville Chamberlain in 1938 waving a piece of paper with Hitler's signature declaring peace for our time. He believed negotiation, reason, mutual decency could hold back ambition. Less than a year later, tanks rolled through Poland. That's what misplaced projection looks like. That's what it means to assume someone else's conscience matches your own. You think you're negotiating with a mirror, but you're standing in front of someone who sees your reflection as a weakness. Seneca once wrote, "The first step toward wisdom is to know you are not wise." But perhaps the first step towards survival is to know not everyone values wisdom at all. Some just value the opening you leave when you assume they do. You weren't betrayed because you gave too much. You were betrayed because you believed they wouldn't take more. You believed they wouldn't take more, but they always will if you don't draw the line. So here it is. Kindness isn't the problem. Unprotected kindness is. There's a difference between being good and being defenseless. The first is a choice. The second is a consequence. What you need now isn't a harder heart. It's a sharper lens. A kind of moral intelligence. Not the kind that makes you paranoid, but the kind that makes you precise. Know where you're giving from and know what it's costing you. Kindness, to be sustainable, must be strategic, and it must know when to close its hand. Think of Eleanor Roosevelt, compassionate, outspoken, fiercely human, but no one's puppet. She was kind, but she was never soft in the way the world could use. When male senators tried to sideline her, she didn't argue. She outmaneuvered. She understood the stage, the stakes, and the strength it takes to be gentle with boundaries. Marcus Aurelius said, "The best revenge is to be unlike him who performed the injury." But even he, the great Stoic, ruled with force when needed. That's the lesson. Your integrity is only as strong as your ability to defend it. Not every smile deserves a yes. Not every cry deserves access. It's not cruelty to withhold yourself from those who've proven they'll weaponize your openness. It's wisdom. You weren't exhausted because you gave too much. You were exhausted because you didn't know where to stop. You didn't know where to stop. And not just in giving, but in speaking. You thought openness made you trustworthy, that sharing more meant bonding more, that honesty poured out without filter would be met with care. But not everyone hears you to understand. Some listen to map your blind spots. The more you explain, the easier you are to manage. The more you confess, the easier you are to predict. What you called vulnerability, others translated into strategy. You gave them the full script and they edited your role. Machiavelli warned clearly, a prince must be a great dissembler. He must know how to hide his intentions. Not because deception is noble, but because exposure is dangerous. Look at Edward Snowden, not the whistleblower, but the system that responded to him. The second information leaked, the power dynamic shifted. Not because someone held a gun, but because someone held a narrative. In every social structure, information isn't neutral, it's currency. And when you spend it too freely, you don't seem generous, you seem cheap. The instinct to over-explain, to clarify your worth, to defend your softness, it doesn't earn you safety. It signals that you need to be understood. And those who need to be understood are rarely the ones who are feared. Seneca wrote, Speech is the mirror of the soul, but some mirrors should be covered. Not everything you feel is meant to be offered. Not every truth serves you better outside your mouth. You weren't dismissed because you were unclear. You were dismissed because you made yourself entirely legible, and what is fully legible is easy to erase. You were easy to erase because you were easy to read, and you were easy to read because you thought being real was enough. But the world doesn't reward what you are. It rewards what people think you are. You can be brilliant and overlooked. You can be capable and disrespected. Because competence doesn't command attention on its own, perception does. And you've seen it, the colleague who speaks in fragments but walks like they own the floor. The manager who leads with posture, not substance, and somehow always gets the promotion. The influencer who recycles thoughts you've had for years, delivered with cleaner visuals, sharper edits, a stronger jawline, and suddenly, their voice is the one that counts. It's not new. In 1960, during the first televised U.S. presidential debate, Nixon out-argued Kennedy on radio, but on television, Kennedy won. Not because of what he said, but how he looked. Relaxed, composed, electable. That's the game. Men in general judge more from appearances than from reality, Machiavelli wrote, and all men have eyes, but few have the gift of understanding. You may think truth has a weight of its own, but in most rooms it's the costume, not the character, that decides who gets to speak. This doesn't mean you have to lie. It means you have to shape, curate, craft how you're seen or be edited out of the narrative by someone who understands that power is a performance. You weren't underestimated because you lacked value. You were underestimated because you didn't know you had to stage it. You didn't know you had to stage it. And when the world didn't see you, you got frustrated. You started raising your voice, not to dominate, but to finally be heard. And that's when they won. Because power doesn't need to overpower you, it only needs to make you lose your center. You think you're proving a point, but what you're really proving is that someone else can pull your strings. You become readable, reactive, loud in all the wrong places. And the moment you react, you hand them the script. Anyone can hold the helm when the sea is calm, wrote Publilius Syrus, but it's the storm that shows who is captain. Think of Serena Williams, one of the greatest athletes alive. But in a 2018 US Open final, a controversial call triggered her. She fought back, not just against the umpire, but against years of injustice. And yet, the headlines didn't focus on the unfairness. They focused on her anger, because perception isn't fair. Emotion, once visible, becomes easy to frame. And in a world where many are watching but few are listening, the loudest thing in the room is often not what you say, but how you say it. Machiavelli warned, the first method for estimating the intelligence of a ruler is to look at the men he has around him. But I'd add, the second is how easily he lets them get under his skin. You thought staying calm was passivity, but true power is rarely loud. It breathes slow. It sees the trap without stepping in. You weren't dismissed because you lacked passion. You were dismissed because they saw how quickly it could be used against you. They saw how quickly it could be used against you because you moved too fast. You reacted when they poked, responded when they baited, showed your position before they even declared theirs. And you thought that made you clear. But clarity too soon is a map handed to your opponent. Power isn't always about acting. Often it's about not acting until the moment is precise. The hunter doesn't chase every sound in the forest. He waits. He watches. He lets others make noise. Because it's not the first to move who wins. It's the one who moves when it matters. Machiavelli understood this better than anyone. The wise man does at once what the fool does finally. But there's another layer to that. The wise man also knows when not to act at all. Think of Barack Obama in the 2011 White House Correspondents' Dinner. While Donald Trump laughed with the crowd, Obama roasted him, surgically, publicly, calmly. Many mark that moment as the spark that fueled Trump's future run. But what's more revealing is what Obama didn't say, what he withheld. The jabs were measured, not emotional. The moment was entertainment, yes, but it was also theater of power. Because true tacticians don't flex constantly. They strike when the silence is thickest. You've been told that hesitation is weakness, but hesitation with intent is not hesitation, it's control. Every move you don't make becomes part of the tension you build, and tension, when aimed, becomes fear. You weren't dismissed because you lacked the will to act. You were dismissed because you moved before the moment had weight. You moved before the moment had weight, because you thought you were still playing a fair game. But what if the game isn't broken? What if it's working exactly as designed? Every system needs a type like you, the over-functioning, the reliable, the one who shows up without being asked, who absorbs the tension so others can keep performing. And as long as you play that role, the system doesn't need to change. That's the trap. You're not just inside the system, you're sustaining it. The only way out isn't to play better. It's to stop being predictable. To become, in their structure, a rupture. Not reckless, not loud, just unreadable. Not the kind of person they can slot into the usual script. James Baldwin said, "The place in which I'll fit will not exist until I make it." And you feel that, don't you? That gnawing awareness that no matter how well you follow the rules were never written for your arrival. So break them. Not for vengeance, but for clarity. Say less when they expect you to explain. Pause longer when they expect you to jump. Ask questions that make rooms uncomfortable. Withdraw just when they think they own you. Think of Prince, not just the artist, but the symbol. When Warner Bros. Tried to control his name, he became unnameable. A literal glyph. He rewrote the terms of engagement by refusing to be defined. That's what survival looks like when you've been typecast as harmless. You don't shout to be seen. You make seeing you require effort. You weren't kept small because you lacked value. You were kept small because you were too easy to classify. You were too easy to classify. Predictable, forgiving, soft enough to be leaned on, quiet enough to be forgotten. But here's the choice that's been waiting at the bottom of all this. Will you keep playing the part they cast you in, or will you rewrite the script entirely? You don't have to be cruel. You don't have to become what hurt you, but you do have to become unreadable, strategic, self-authorship. Machiavelli never asked you to become a villain. He asked you to stop being a pawn, to stop confusing goodness with obedience, because goodness without power is not harmless, it's disposable. Viktor Frankl wrote, "When we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves." And maybe that's what this moment is. Not the end of your kindness, but the beginning of your control over it. The part where you learn to say no without guilt. Where you realize not everyone deserves your softness. Where you speak less and listen harder. Not to agree, but to observe. Because every time you react, you tell them who you are. But when you pause, you make them guess. Power is not in the noise. Power is in the silence. And silence, when chosen, is not emptiness. It's strategy. It's space. It's a signal that you're no longer on autopilot. You've heard 15 chapters of what the world does to the unguarded, the overly generous, the ones who wait for fairness that never arrives. So now I'll ask you, gently but clearly, are you ready to be seen differently? Or will you keep hoping that being good will eventually be enough? If you've made it this far, I want to know who's truly listening. Leave a comment that says, "Power is in the silence." Let me know you're not just hearing this, you're feeling it. And if this shifted something in you, share it, subscribe, like. Because this isn't the end of the conversation. It's the first time you're hearing the rules spoken out loud. Don't be another good person quietly fading into the background. Be the anomaly. Be the one who knew and then moved differently.